So Goyal, welcome. The big headline from the budget is this 35% increase in capital expenditure, which the government is promising. However, if you look at the numbers in the last year, partly on account of the pandemic, the lockdown, the migrant crisis, the government wasn't able to spend the claims that were made on how much money the government would spend. Now the critical question is, where do you hope to infuse this injection of the capital expenditure? And are you hoping that this will have the multiplier effect, which will really kickstart the economy, take it into one gear up?
Rahul, thank you very much. First of all, last year you are well aware that we've had two very serious waves of COVID. The second wave in the first quarter, and in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, the third wave. So clearly there were setbacks to the investment plans or the amount we could spend. And it's a phenomena that we saw everywhere. Wherever there was labor required, people went away to the villages, and different supply constraints, particularly because of the disruption of supply chains worldwide. But I think the worst is over. Things are getting more and more normalized. And I do believe that in this current quarter also, we'll be able to make up for what we lost, some of what we lost in January. But next year, using PM Gati Shakti, which is a very powerful tool that has been launched by Honorable Prime Minister, we are very confident that our planning process and execution of these projects will become far more robust. There's also another element. Many CapEx projects or plans have a state government input also on a cost-sharing basis. In order to support them, since last year we found many states not able to put up their share of the requirement, the Honorable Finance Minister has given a 1 lakh crore rupee 50-year interest-free funding to the states for their CapEx plans or their margin money. I think this will also support the efforts to see larger use of the CapEx provided in the budget.
In some senses, is this an admission, sir, that the private sector isn't rising to the challenge when it comes to investment? I remember one of the things that you'd said and others had said, that we've reduced corporate taxes when corporate taxes were rationalized in the hope that the private sector will now do its part. I remember you were in Mumbai at an India Today conclave and you said that humne apna kaam kiya hai. You were speaking to your friends in industry in Mumbai. That hasn't happened. Even though capacity utilization is in the mid-70s, we're not seeing aggressive privatization by India, aggressive private investment by India in the India story. Is that why the government feels it needs to step up to the challenge? And are you disappointed that private investment hasn't shot up in the way that you'd hoped for?
Not at all, Rahul. Now look at the timelines. September 19 is when we announced the massive tax cuts and the boost to private investment in manufacturing. By the time people really reject their plans, make investment plans, you come into January, February, and COVID hits the world. Not only India, hits the world. It's the worst pandemic the world has ever seen. So obviously, private investments do take a little backseat during a time of uncertainty. And you saw the stock market at that time collapsing. You saw the uncertainty all over the world. So I think I would not blame the private sector at all. It was the times were so bad at that time that soon after our announcements, if things had remained normal, by now we would have seen significant private investment. But unfortunately, the last 2 years have been COVID years. It is in such periods that government has to step up the investment program, which we have done last year. And this year, a record 35% increase. And state and center together over 10 lakh crores. When you add the multiplier effect, the multiplier impact will give you a huge demand stimulus or impetus in the market. And that demand, coupled with the fact that we can see imports are also rising, will encourage private sector where they can see demand in front of their eyes and start looking at investments.
I want to walk across to the budget intelligence dashboard and ask you about disinvestment, because if you look at the government's target this year for disinvestment in FY23, it's only 65,000 crore rupees. In FY21, the target was 2,10,000 crore. In the next year, the target was 1,75,000 crore, which today was revised to 78,000 crores. In FY21, we were able to realize only 16% of the disinvestment target. This is less than a third of the target which was set in the last 2 years. There are two ways of looking at it, Minister Goyal. One is that the government is being conservative and realistic. The other is that the government has realized that, because of the stock markets not being as enthusiastic as they were last year, it will be difficult to raise more than this and therefore don't set high expectations. The other is the government's possibly lost its mojo, enthusiasm in trying to push through disinvestment like we saw over the past few months, especially on the back of Air India. Everybody thought, okay, here is a government that's now pushing privatization aggressively. This target doesn't suggest aggressive disinvestment plans.
Rahul, as you might have heard today itself, Neelachal Ispat announcement was made in the budget. Now that's a company that MMTC had floated 20 years ago, which had no business. MMTC had no business to be in the steel industry, manufacturing on top of it. So I think this is a government which is steadfast in its commitment. Whatever we have announced, we are implementing. Disinvestment 2 years ago was planned to be much more aggressive. But as I said just now, COVID came in. And obviously during COVID, one wouldn't have been able to get the best of interest in our disinvestment program. Also, disinvestment entails a lot of background working, particularly because these PSUs over a period of time had built up a lot of baggage, which we are trying to clear, segregate the non-core assets and core assets, get the land and building out of the way so that unrealized profits of the company remain with the government and don't go to the new buyer. So a lot of deep thought goes into it.
Okay.
And therefore, if you will see in both the years, we have now tried to become more realistic, not at all lost any mojo. We are completely committed that government has no business to be in the business, many of the businesses that we are there. The Honorable Finance Minister under Prime Minister's guidance had set out a certain roadmap on how public sector enterprises will be either retained in government or will be disinvested.
Okay.
I think we stand committed to that.
Stay with me. I have one more final question for you, but I also want to introduce your colleague in the Union Cabinet, Ashwini Vaishnav, who's joining us. We'll speak to him about a lot of what's happening in telecom and railways. I have one more question for you, Minister Goyal, which is to do with exports. Exports now at a decade high. Now, part of this is that on the back of the pandemic, there's been a general increase in global goods trade. The other is because a lot of what you've been doing in government, exports are finally bouncing back. In this quarter, estimates suggest that India's share of global trade could be more than 2%. How sustainable is this increase in exports in your view as Commerce and Industry Minister? Final question to you and then we go to Minister Vaishnav.
We just released the figures for export for January. It's one more record, $34 billion of exports in January. Another record, so for 10 months in a row, we've crossed $30 billion of exports. We are now more exports than the highest India had ever done in a full year. So we are well on track to do 400 billion as the Honorable Prime Minister had finalized. But I must share with you, this is not a top-down, top-driven export target only. This came after extensive consultations with the missions all over the world, with exporters, export promotion councils, with industry. And therefore, it's a very inclusive target that we had set.
Okay.
And that's why the success. We are now in the process of working with industry to set next year's target. Obviously, every year you can't have a 40% growth. But we'll continue to show consistent and steady growth. And that will be the way forward for our exports.
Well, this on your watch is actually quite a significant achievement, and it is in India's interest that exports continue to grow in the way that they have. So thank you very much, Mr. Goyal, for joining us.